hope I'll have another chance to visit this splendid campus. I'm very impressed by the facilities here, by the students I've met, and I think on behalf of the Free Market Roadshow, and from my perspective, the support you guys have given us here and providing us with a good audience too, and a stalwart audience that was able to stick it out to the end. So the general approach of the Free Market Roadshow is to promote the ideas of a society of free and responsible individuals. A society of free and responsible individuals. Now this is the basic idea behind classical liberal thought, where we will place the individual at the heart of all of our social analysis. And that we examine that if we allow that individual to be free and responsible, that is, accountable for their actions, then we will live in a more harmonious setting. So this is a very difficult topic. The idea, I'm going to focus more on drugs, but I thought it might make it sound more interesting. When I grew up, we talked about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, so I left out the rock and roll. Now, it's a complex problem, but it's not necessarily a moral problem. Now, many classical liberals would expect that markets and virtually anything should be allowable inasmuch as they are voluntary and are the outcome of the human action of choosing individuals, and that they are capable then of learning from their mistakes or whatever, which would include even sex for hire. Now that may be a moral question, or at least it might seem to you in terms of your own values a moral question. But drug use may not be a moral question in that sense. So I'm going to approach the question of drugs perhaps in a slightly different light than I might do if we were talking about, for example, prostitution. So let's start with what we might think of as the ideals for a free society. Now, free society is essentially one where there's an absence of slavery. This is a basic premise of, I think, that most people, an assertion that most people would agree with, that slavery and its near cousin theft are unacceptable arrangements that we would wish to avoid. Now, if we accept this idea that slavery is an unacceptable institution, then we come to embrace the idea of self-ownership. That is, you own yourself, but not only that, you own and should be entitled to control any productive output as long as it's legal and lawful. It should be yours to dispose of. Okay? So this idea of self-ownership really is the basis of a classical liberal argument for private property. So private property then becomes an essential element of this thing that we would call self-ownership, or to put it in a more direct term, human liberty. Okay? Now, the question of taxation earlier today might be brought up again in this context. Who has the first claim to your income? Do your parents? Do you? Does your wife or your husband? Your children? Who has the first claim to your income in a modern setting? The state. Is that the way we should live? Should the state have first claim to our income and then allow you to have whatever might be left over? And what is the reasonable amount? Is it 102%, as we saw in Sweden, in some cases with marginal tax rates? Well, most of us would find that unreasonable. I remember in the 1960s, Americans thought the Swedes were completely crazy. Their average tax rate was 25%. Of course, the Swedes thought 25% was high at that time. But it gradually crept higher and higher because these claims against our income became greater and greater. So we increasingly became a slave to the state, in some sense. Because to be a slave is to be in a situation where someone else directs what you produce towards their own ends, which is what the state does through taxation. They want to, the Americans want to set off cruise missiles all over the world, have drones that murder civilians in Yemen. They do it with my money. I'm a slave to them in that regard. I'm a slave to these policies, good or bad. So this idea of self-ownership gives us a strong argument against arbitrary taxation. I mean, the best economic argument for taxation is to produce those goods or services that have direct mutual benefits. It might be national defense. It could be a court system or security. So, but now what we have is the states, governments, provide all kinds of goods and services. Right? The question brought up earlier today was, well, building the roads. But roads were built privately until the state took over that obligation. Education was generally provided privately or through churches or some religious organization until the state assumed responsibility for that. Welfare, charity resided in the family, in the village, again maybe religious institution, until the state took that over. So the state had continued to expand, and as a consequence, what that means is that you have less liberty and fewer resources, and they have more power and more of what you have. So part of this Free Market Roadshow is to try to examine this process and to find out whether or not that's fair and just and on what those conditions might be. So anyway, this idea of self-ownership then is about self-determination. You should be able to discover what life you want to live, how you want to live it, and be able to develop the means to do so. So your life purposes should be your own, and they should be as expansive as possible. Other people cannot enslave you to do what you should do based on their beliefs of what you should do, or to limit you in being who you want to be, whether it's a lifestyle choice, if you want to marry a same-sex partner, whatever it may be. Those are your choices. Now, self-ownership also, as I mentioned, is that you are entitled to control any lawfully produced thing. Now, if you steal my jacket, the reason theft is bad is that it's as though you put me in a room for whatever time it took for me to buy this, to earn the money to buy this jacket. It's as though you had me kept in a room for that amount of time, because now you've dispossessed me of this object that is my property. So we should have maximum control over our property if it's lawfully acquired. So it turns out that private property is essential for free society. A society where you have expansive human liberty and extensive personal dignity. Dignity comes from living a life of your own choosing and achieving those life purposes that you set before you. So private property is essential to that, because it will become the means by which you achieve those goals in most instances. Now, a free society is one where the individual is the building block. It's the focus. In a way, if we think of society like a forest, it's incoherent to think of a healthy forest if we neglect the condition of the tree. It's the same in social sciences. The individual must be, if we want to have a good society, if we want to have a free society, if we want to have a fair society, a just society, we have to accommodate the individual as an individual. Individuals do not exist in a vacuum. We thrive in a social setting. So this idea of a free society is not some atomistic individual hidden away, grumbling along the lines of Ayn Rand about other people's altruism. Okay? It is about humanity, interacting with humanity. The application of the rules that govern our behavior, most of which were discovered and implemented before we encountered many of these modern ideas about government. Now, those rules must be applied equally, regardless of your social status, your gender, your wealth, your social conditions, or whatever. So, in other words, there must be an absence of privileges. No individual should be able to do what you cannot do. Discussion this morning about free trade zones, where you allow foreign producers or foreign investors to have privileges that domestic investors don't have. This is, to me, wrong. Why would you give to rich foreigners opportunities to do things that your own people can't do? So, the idea then must be also that even if you're a powerful political leader, you have no more rights, you have no more privileges than the ordinary citizen. If you break the law, you must be punished. You must go to jail the same. And you must be held accountable for the same misdeeds, whatever. Of course, we know in real life this doesn't happen, in particular with government officials. You could look at Laurent Fabius in France when he was prime minister. He halted the application of an established blood protocol to screen for HIV/AIDS viruses because the Pasteur Institute was developing one. The consequence of that is that hundreds of French hemophiliacs died an avoidable and miserable death because they were infected with the HIV/AIDS virus. No politician was held accountable for that. If that decision had been made, and it was made at the top, if that decision had been made by a private company, the person would have gone to jail, the company would have been shut down forever, they would have bulldozed the factory and paved it with concrete, and people would have applauded. Politicians do it. They're just doing their job. So, I mean, there's something that we need to examine here. This absence of privilege is not only about economic privilege, but also the privilege of power, the privilege of status. We should not assign that. Now, you may grant it to someone. I will let you go through the door before me. I will grant you that privilege, but that's my choice. That's a different thing. But these institutionalized privileges are what we're arguing against. Now, the thing about the free society, it's very optimistic. That is, you believe that humanity can and will improve itself. That human institutions are not perfectible, but they are, because of human nature, we are problem solvers. Humanity, we solve problems. And part of the reason we solve problems is because we're looking after our family, we're looking after the attempt to solve the problem of achieving our life purposes. We're constantly encountering these things and trying to find a way around them. Up till now, we've done a pretty good job. Hasn't been perfect, it's been a bumpy road. Now, will we solve problems of the future in the same way? It's not certain, but we've got good evidence that there's going to be this constant search for those solutions. So, a free society is where you get the progress. A free society means let them try out this new concept, Uber, or whatever it may be. That's where you get progress. If you try to interfere with freedom of action, freedom of choice, freedom of association, freedom of thought, you don't have progress. A free society is where you get that. So this is why I'm optimistic about the future, because I think that extensive human liberties that do not interfere with other people's human liberties is the way to go. Now, what are the rules of behavior then? Generally, I mean, come up with some simple ones. Respect the rights and liberty of all other individuals. Okay? Foreigners, family members, whatever. Okay? So, we respect the humanity of all people. And that means we respect that they're going to have faults that we don't see in ourselves very often. So, tolerate the views and actions of all other individuals. This is the basis of freedom of speech, freedom that you have an academic freedom, where you should have Marxists on the economics and philosophy department. You should have people that are expressing different types of views. So it's the only way we discover something that approaches the truth, is by having these different viewpoints and expressing them and debating them and arguing them, because the best one will win. If it's a bad idea, it will lose. But you'll only know if it's a bad idea if it confronts a challenge. So, openness to new ideas. It's difficult. I almost said we're all young. Well, I feel young.